This morning at Hillsborough, we concluded 2 weeks arduous negotiations over the devolution of policing and justice. I think that for those of us who have been involved in negotiations will breathe a sigh of relief. But I think that also for the people of Northern Ireland, this has been a good day because it has shown that once again politics can work. Political negotiation is the way forward. And we're particularly glad, of course, that Sinn Féin realised that threats of pulling down the Assembly and all other kinds of things were not going to work, and that if we were going to have devolution of policing and justice, it had to be done on an agreed basis. I think that it's a triumph for the DUP because, of course, we had indicated in 2007 that the devolution of policing and justice was an objective towards which we were working. But we would only work towards that on the basis that there was community confidence that devolution of policing and justice occurred in a way and occurred to an institution in which there was no fear that that power would be abused. The first step in that, way back in 2007, was to insist that Sinn Féin started to respect the rule of law and to support the police. And to do that, they had to show their sincerity by joining the policing board, taking part in the DPPs, and also encouraging people within the nationalist community to give evidence to the police when crimes were committed. Over the last 2-3 years, their commitment, at least to that part of the agreement, has been shown. They have worked in the policing board without any hassle being caused for the police. They have worked through DPPs, and they have also encouraged people to give evidence to the police. The second thing we said was that we would not, under any circumstances, because of the history of the Republican movement, tolerate a member of Sinn Féin being the Justice Minister. That meant long hours of work with the British government to ensure that the legislation going through the House of Commons stopped Sinn Féin being able to be the Policing and Justice Minister, and that as well has been secured. There has to be a cross-community vote for the Policing and Justice Minister, and of course that gives us the veto over any candidate who we believe is not suitable for the post. The third thing was that if policing and justice were to devolve to Northern Ireland, then there had to be a satisfactory budget, and before Christmas, in negotiations with the government at Westminster, Peter Robinson secured a very satisfactory budget, one which the police have said is a very satisfactory budget, and one which will mean that next year about £68 million more will be available on the police budget, but the total package is worth about £800 million. That left a number of issues which still had to be resolved and which have been dealt with over the last 2 weeks at Hillsborough. The first one was, what is the relationship between the Justice Minister and the Executive? We had to make sure that the decisions which the Justice Minister had to make would not get bogged down in executive disunity or any attempts to delay things through the executive. So we had to find a mechanism whereby the Justice Minister had a degree of freedom to act on decisions that he felt had to be made quickly. There also had to be a clear indication that there would be no interference by the executive in the day-to-day running of the police and the judiciary. And also, of course, there was the issue of parades, because people have said, what's the link between policing and parades? Well, the link's very obvious. If you get disruptive parades, then you will have a drain on the police budget, because of course you've got to bring police in to police those parades, and also the police are then put in the front line between both factions, and that can affect community confidence in the police. So there had to be an effective way of dealing with parades. Those issues, I believe, have been satisfactorily resolved at Hillsborough, and therefore opened the way to having policing and justice devolved to Northern Ireland. We also pushed some other issues, of course, and that as a result of the negotiations, people who had served in the police in the past, part-time reserves, will now have a package of £20 million. we also pushed the issue of how do we improve the operation of the executive, and that has meant and will mean taking some power away from the First and Deputy First Minister and giving it to executive members, so that papers and policies, etc., can't be held up in the office of the First and Deputy First Minister. And there's been a range of other things which have been dealt with. For that reason, I believe that we have actually got an agreement which will lead to better work of the executive, will remove the poison of disagreement about the devolution of policing and justice, and actually helps us as a party to achieve our objective of drawing Sinn Féin more closely into the whole apparatus of the state, and therefore getting their commitment to making Northern Ireland work, rather than, as they did in the past, trying to destroy Northern Ireland. So I think that from a unionist point of view, we have achieved a good objective. One of the reasons why I find the kind of knee-jerk reaction from the TUV, who condemned this, of course, before they even read the document, to be a bit bizarre. Their only strategy appears to be, don't devolve policing and justice. Let's have a crisis. Let's have an election. Let's make Sinn Féin the biggest party. And then let's have direct rule. The one thing I have found, even over the past 2 weeks, is that when the British and Irish governments get together, as they did in the first 2 days of the talks at Hillsborough, they never come up with a solution which is good for unionists. In fact, the first paper that they gave us was more like a Sinn Féin paper. And I think that that's the flavour that you would get with direct rule if it were to be returned. For that reason, I believe it is important that we get stable rule at Stormont, we get a good devolution settlement, and then we get people working together within the apparatus of the state, within the United Kingdom, to make Northern Ireland a more stable place where people can come and invest and where people can live. That's why I think it's a good deal, and that's why I hope that during the community consultation people will give it the thumbs up, so that on the 9th of March we can vote for the devolution of policing and justice. On the 2nd of April it can happen, and we can get on with the business of governing Northern Ireland properly.